most of the research says that buyers, by the time they get to us, by the time they pick up the phone or email us, they're 60 to 70% of the way through a buying journey. They've made a lot of decisions. But the problem they've got is too much information. The problem they've got is, well, I've looked at 20 websites and they're all beautiful and they're all lovely and everybody says they're the best care home or the best car salesperson or whatever. I need you now to take all that information and make sense of it for me. And I need to find out who I can trust.
Hello and welcome to Data Driven Insights inaugural podcast. My name is Daniel Cohen. I'm the head of business development here at Data Driven Insights, and I would like to welcome Lee Warren, who is an expert in behavioral persuasion. He's also a magician that blends psychology and sales to train salespeople. He's also an exceptionally experienced salesperson in his own right, having been a sales director at News International. Thank you very much for joining us, Lee. Really do appreciate you being here today. We're going to talk about sales in general, but in specifically the window of opportunity and how that's changed over the last 18 months now. Sales has evolved. So maybe you could just start by giving our audience just a little bit of background about yourself.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Hello. I was going to say good morning, but of course I don't know what time people are watching this, do I? So hello. It's a real pleasure to be here and a thrill to launch the inaugural podcast. So as you mentioned, I mean, my background's in two things really. One is sales. So I was in sales leadership roles at several organisations, including News International and Hertz Leasing. But I've also been a professional performer all my life. So I've been a magician and a mind reader. And the reason I do what I do these days is because those two backgrounds of sales and, if you like, understanding the psychology of how people pay attention and believe things and follow stories, those two things come really well together to help me to be able to teach and show other people how to sell better and how to engage and become more compelling and more persuasive. And I put a lot of my ideas down in a book. I wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Busy Person's Guide to Great Presenting, which I'm very proud of, won an award. And then I spend most of my life now speaking in keynotes or on podcasts like this.
It's a really fascinating book, which I've got here, so I'm going to give it a plug to all of our audience. It's well worth reading. It's not just about presenting. It just gives you a whole range of ideas on how to sell better, because ultimately that is presenting. Presenting is a form of sales. And there's a couple of elements which in the book, which I'd want to touch on a bit later on. So quite clearly, I feel a bit stupid saying this, but the last 18 months have changed the landscape of every industry quite dramatically. And there's lots of different sectors that are having to adapt to a different way of approaching their customer base. So there's been less opportunity for face-to-face meetings. You've had to suddenly go to this new way of meeting people online. It's a completely different way of doing things, and it'd be great to hear your thoughts in particular, I suppose, on how you think companies should be adapting their sales process, what techniques they should be adopting now to make use of what is a shortened window of opportunity. So whereas before you had many more steps and many more contact points with a potential customer or client, nowadays that's much different. They've got more opportunity to get information before even contacting you. So that chance to really sort of sell your product or sell your services is that much shorter now.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot wrapped up in that sentence. And I think there's a few things to mention, really. So one is about selling products and services. And in fact, one of my constant themes, and this was true pre-pandemic, but is even more true now, is I think a lot of salespeople actually are too product-led and too service-led. In other words, a lot of salespeople are very good at talking about their products and their services rather than being what I would call problem-led. In other words, really understanding the problems that their target market are facing and how they help to solve those. That's one of the things that's really distinguished great salespeople from either average or just poor salespeople in this crisis. It's an ability to really get into the heads of their market, if you like. I mean, a phrase I found myself using last year a lot. So last year was 2020. We're in 2021 now. but I kept saying to people, you have to stop solving the problems of 2019. Because so many websites and sales pitches and sort of rehearsed sales patter, so much of it was about 2019, the world that people were in. And of course, last year, 2020, all of our clients got thrown into totally different worlds. They got thrown into states of uncertainty and stress and panic and worry. And people went from thinking, what's our 3-year strategic goal, to, are we going to be in business next Friday? You're right. I mean, it literally changed everything. So that's one of the things I think is always worth emphasizing, and that's not specific to the COVID problem. But something that's come out of the pandemic, I don't necessarily think there's a lot of stuff that's new that's come out, but I think a lot of things have been accelerated that were happening anyway, and probably we've seen in 10 months what we would have seen in 10 years, I suspect, in terms of digital transformation of sales and so on. And one of the things that really great salespeople have been doing is, I think to be a good salesperson, you need to be an optimist, right? You have to have something that gets you up in the morning, able to face the day and able to have sales conversations and accept rejections and negotiate well and so on. So you've got to have a bit of optimism at your core. And so one of the things that's really distinguished great salespeople is an ability to really grab hold of the opportunities rather than focus on the obstacles. And I don't want to be too facetious about that, because there obviously have and continue to be considerable obstacles in our way. But there are lots of opportunities. I mean, one of the obvious one is you mentioned, there are fewer touch points. But actually, for many of us, that's turned out to be a great thing, a truly great thing, because there are fewer gatekeepers now. Quite often we get to decision makers much quicker. And in March 2020, for example, I mean, I decided I would build and maintain my network better. So I sent out lots of emails to people, and they were to friends, competitors, peers, clients, potential clients, people I'd never met. And I just said, I'm having a virtual coffee every morning. It's just half an hour, one-on-one. There's no agenda, no sales, just a chat, a gossip, a shoulder to cry on. And I was astonished at the number of people who said yes straight away, who grabbed it. And I mean, some of these were people, if I walked into the reception of their giant corporate buildings and said, I'd like half an hour coffee with so-and-so, please, I'd be thrown out of the building. You know, but when I did it as an email in Crisis 2020, there were loads of people who accepted. So that's one quick example of grabbing the opportunities. And I think there are loads. There's probably too many to list in a single podcast. But just as a general mindset thing, I think one of the big shifts we have to take is, what are the opportunities here? Am I really using them? Am I really making the most of them?
Yeah, totally. And I think you've touched on a number of really interesting points there, and that adaptability, being able to think on your feet and being able to come up with new ways of overcoming unexpected obstacles like a global pandemic. It's going to separate the really good from the average or the just good. And almost to a certain extent, being a salesperson isn't really the correct term for a salesperson anymore, because the need to actually go out and physically sell a product is very rare. A lot of the times people will have enough knowledge about a product or service or what there is, that what they're looking at, to be able to make relatively informed decisions without having to have a salesperson come in and sell to them. So being able to understand that customers and that clients' needs is more important than actually going out and saying, well, it does this, 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 and this, and this, which might not have much relevance to them because they already know that anyway, and then forcing it upon them. So having that, just changing the approach entirely and moving away from that scripted piece, which I hate more than anything else in the world, and just being more natural and taking more care to listen to what they have to say. And that's really, really, really important. I used to be in property for years and years and years, and one of the first things I was taught was, you're going to be in front of someone for maybe an hour, and you're not going to speak 75% of the time. So when you do speak, make sure what you say is exceptionally relevant, and the questions you ask are going to get you the information you need to be able to get the result you want. And I don't think that's always the case. A lot of times I'm sold to. And I can hear it's a script from the moment they start talking to the moment that they finish, and I can hear the points where they've been told laugh, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, when's this going to end? How do I hang up the phone without being rude? And I think it's a new way of thinking, and companies have to adapt really and change.
I think you're right. I think it's both a new way of thinking and it's a very old way of thinking. I mean, all salespeople should read Aristotle, and probably didn't think you were going to hear that today. But Aristotle, in his great book Rhetoric, laid out really all the tools of what it takes to be persuasive and engaging, and really get other people to buy into your message. And one of those was ethos, about empathy. But having some real deep understanding of the audience's need, and an audience in a sales situation obviously is the buyer or the potential buyer. And actually, what you said about property, I think there are two really key points about sales wrapped up in there. So one is, there's a really old phrase in sales. It's from Jeffrey Gitomer. People love to buy, but they hate to be sold to. And we really see this in property. I mean, everyone turning up to a property, wants to spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds. They want to spend that money. They want to buy something, but they really don't want to be sold to. And at the moment, I'm sitting, it's rather beautiful, this backdrop, I think. I'm sitting in a flat in Spain that I rent. And before COVID, we were going to buy a property in Spain. And so we got taken around lots of properties by estate agents. And I was fascinated. So the second thing I think is really important in sales is being able to articulate value, to always be able to bring some value to the sales transaction, because in many ways sales is a conversation about exchanging value. I mean, that's really what sales is fundamentally, I think. And so many of the estate agents were so bad, and all of their contributions were absolutely lacking in value. So in other words, we'd walk into a property and they'd say, "Oh, here is the kitchen." And I'd say, "What, this room with a fridge and a sink in it?" "Yes, that's the kitchen." "Oh, okay." "Oh, and here's the bathroom." "Oh, what, the room with the shower in it?" And all of their information was totally transactional, and it didn't add any value at all. And then we met one estate agent who, as we walked in, he started talking about the distribution of the property. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you really need to look out for it." He said, "Because Spain's hot, and when you turn up with your shopping, you want the kitchen to be really near the front door, because you don't want to have to walk through the whole flat in order to put your shopping in the kitchen." And that was a valuable addition to the sale. He told me something I didn't know as a potential customer, and he was instantly a better estate agent.
Yeah, and I've fallen into that trap as an estate agent. It's quite hard to walk into a property and you're opening doors without saying, "Oh, this is," but I made a joke out of it. So it was like, you'd be surprised to hear that this is the kitchen, that kind of thing. I'd already built the rapport on the initial contact. So whether that was a telephone call to find out what their requirements were, to find out what the key factors they were looking for in a home, whether it was location, proximity to a school, size of reception area, garden, all of that stuff. So I'd already found out all the information I needed. So when we met, we'd built a bit of a rapport. I knew what their needs were. When we're walking around the property, they're seeing a property that's actually going to match their requirements as opposed to something that doesn't. And at that point, we're just continuing to build the relationship and sort of narrow down that search criteria from what's actually what they need to what they want. And there's a big difference between the two. And this is going to lead to quite nicely to a part in your book, Ham Pie, which I found fascinating with regards to the sales process and how, though that acronym, those 6 words, accurately reflect the journey of a lot of buyers, because lots of buyers are across a variety of sectors. There's an emotional element to it as well. So we've spoken about it in property, but if you're looking at a care home for a relative, or whether that's a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, who may not be in the best physical or mental health, and they need a particular type of care, it's not just something you need. There's a big emotional attachment to that. And likewise, even buying a car. For some people, there's an emotional attachment to buying a car. Others just need something to get to A to B. But others, they really want that car. Whether their parents used to have a similar model or whatever, there's an emotional element to buying lots of different things across a range of different sectors. And you describe it exceptionally well in your book. So if you could maybe expand upon that for the audience.
Yeah, of course. So HAMPIE, HAMPIE, it's an acronym I came up with because I spend a lot of my time either giving keynote speeches to sales teams or sitting in rooms working with sales teams. I wanted to come up with a really simple way that people could really understand deep down what's usually going on in the process of sales, or indeed the process of persuading anybody to listen to and believe a message, whether that message is written down or spoken. And so I came up with the acronym HAMPI. It's very easy to remember and very simple to understand, but it's the practical use of it and the practical application of it is terrific. So HAM stands for Hearts and Minds, HAM. And the idea here is very simple. Most of us, as far as we can tell, across the planet, regardless of culture, gender, background, whatever, most of us will tend to make decisions emotionally first, and then we justify those rationally afterwards. This seems to be the engine of the human decision-making process, and there's loads of research in psychology behind this and some really fascinating stuff you can read around it. But a very quick example is if I've asked thousands of people this question, if I were to say to you, which do you think is healthier for you, spinach or sugary things like chocolate and cakes? Most people say, well, spinach is obviously healthier than sugary things like chocolate or cakes. And then if I ask, well, do you eat spinach more often than you eat sugary things like chocolate and cake? Most people, by far the majority of people, say, no, I don't. And so it's a really interesting example that there's a rational proposition there. There's something which goes for your mind, which is you should eat spinach more than you eat sugary things. But most of us made an emotional decision a long time ago. In my case, I just like chocolate more than I like spinach. I just prefer it. And it's really hard, once I've made that emotional decision, for anybody to change my mind or change my behavior just using facts, data, content, statistics, once that emotional decision has been made. So someone could see me walking along the street eating a chocolate bar and say, Lee, don't eat that chocolate bar, it's 2,000 calories. And my brain will say, well, it's only 2,000 calories. I'll literally change the shape of the universe to suit that emotional prejudice. So in terms of sales, the really important thing is you always have to work to get some emotional connection with your buyer, with your prospect, with your client, before you hit them with the content, with the mind stuff. So in other words, the estate agency example is a really easy one to understand, even though it's not directly related to the care homes, but I'll come to that in a second. So when I walk into a property and someone says, this is the kitchen, that's putting facts before any emotion. Right, and a great estate agent might do something around what experience do you want when walking into that property? Do you drive or not? What's it like? Do you have children? What's it going to feel like living here? That kind of stuff. And that might sound a little bit. Sorry, I knocked my camera. That might sound a little bit too blunt in a podcast like this, but that's the rough idea. And then PIE, P-I-E. Stands for some of how you can do this. So P is for pictures, so pictures in its broadest sense. So people who are very persuasive, very engaging, very often talk and write in terms of pictures. So they'll tell stories, they give quick anecdotes, little metaphors, analogies. They're always saying things like, wouldn't it be great if ... in 6 months where we want to be is ... Do you remember that problem last year ... They're always painting little pictures in your mind, because pictures are easy to understand, and things that are easy to understand are easy to believe. It's not fair, shouldn't be true, but it seems to be. I stands for interest, and the idea here is painfully simple. It's that when you're in a sales role, you have to understand what's interesting, what's relevant, what's engaging to the clients, as much as or more than to you. And far too many salespeople talk about what's relevant and interesting to them. So this comes back to the thing I was saying earlier about being too product-led or too service-led. So in a care home situation, for example, I can imagine a lot of people probably make the mistake of talking too much in terms of processes, systems, and facilities. So they might be saying things like, well, we bill on a monthly basis, and you have to fill in this form and do this, and there are 2 showers over there, and this is the main corridor. And all of that stuff is process stuff and system stuff. And I would imagine that when people are, I don't know, touch wood, I haven't had to be in that situation, but I would imagine these are very stressful times for many people, and that their decision-making machinery is under quite a lot of panic and chaos, I would guess, by the time it comes to having to help a relative go into a care home. So one of the things is to really step back and say, okay, what's the emotional journey here for these clients, for these potential clients? And how can we, if you like, de-stress that and look at the positive emotional side of it, rather than increasing all of the fact stuff, all of the process, the system stuff that isn't really relevant to that emotional journey. And then the E, by the way, PIE, so pictures, interest, and E is enthusiasm. And by enthusiasm, I mean you're the first person you've got to sell to. So you've got to convince yourself before you can convince anybody else. So that thing you said earlier about pulling away from tired sales scripts, and when you can hear someone's been through this 100 times before, And I would imagine that's very, very true in a care home situation as well, as in we really want to believe, or I would really want to believe, if I was going to check out a care home to talk to somebody, I would really want to believe they're genuinely enthusiastic, genuinely passionate about the great experience there, the care there, that they're not just a functionary, churning people in.
Yeah, totally. Because you buy into people. Ultimately, you're going to buy into the person that you're talking to first, and that's why it's so important to build up that level of trust with a potential client and customer. Otherwise, it's not. It's going to make the sale that much harder. Completely lost my train of thought there. That's deeply concerning. Fortunately, I've got James.
Let me mention one more thing while you gather your thoughts, because this is quite interesting in terms of sales collateral. So going back to the very earlier question, and this might be relevant to care homes as well, when you said how are things changing and so on. One of the possible mistakes to make when things are changing very fast, when we're in this world of digital transformation, when perhaps many meetings might be on Zoom or FaceTime or something like that, is to embrace the opportunities in that, but not necessarily to forget everything else that works well. So what I mean by that, for example, is we may be, I've got no evidence for this, this is just a hunch, but we may be emerging into a world where physical collateral starts becoming important again. So for instance, a care home that had a beautiful brochure that really clearly lays out the process of going to stay in the care home and everything. For example, that who sends that following a FaceTime call, for example, or perhaps sends that in advance of a FaceTime call to go through during the call. So a business like that might stand out a little bit if everyone else is just going 100% virtual. I've got no evidence for that. It's just a hunch that might be something worth considering.
I think it's an interesting point, and I think it's those. So from our perspective as a market research company, what we want companies to do is to understand who their market is. We want them to understand where that potential market are living, and we want them to really understand what are the key points, what are the key factors that your clients are looking for. So understand your market, and understand your client base will then make the rest of your job that much easier. So if you know that a certain type of client is looking for A, B, C, and D, and they've picked up the phone to you, you can automatically tackle those points first. So you're demonstrating an understanding of their needs, you're demonstrating an understanding of their wants, and then you're actively being able to communicate that in a manner which they're going to appreciate and buy into, and you're going to develop trust straight away. And confidence in the product, your company, and it just makes everything that much easier, really. So it's that empathy and understanding, and realizing that the way that we're communicating with people has changed, and being able to demonstrate value has changed. And the sooner companies are able to grasp that and adapt it and take it out to their entire workforce, not just their sales team, is incredibly, I think, just it's a necessary factor that has to sort of come into play here.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think the importance of grabbing data and grabbing insights from marketing is crucial. And the point you made about everyone in the company, not just salespeople. I mean, I firmly believe that anybody in the business who has contact with clients is a salesperson. They might not be signing a contract, they might not be negotiating the actual figures, but they're always either adding to or detracting from the main message. And the other thing you mentioned about using data to really understand the market, I think is crucial, and particularly in very emotional situations, or where people are having almost. I was going to use the phrase "grudge purchase." I don't mean that, but where you're in a situation where you are not necessarily, in a perfect world, you wouldn't be choosing to make this purchase, or you wouldn't be choosing to make this decision. It's sort of being forced on you. I think using data to really understand what that's like for the client, and to simplify as much as possible to make that journey as effectively your hand holding. Because the other thing that's really changed in sales is that even 20 years ago, most of the sales journey was that the salesperson had most of the power and most of the information. And as clients, we would come to a salesperson to get that information, to get that knowledge. That's totally, the internet has totally changed that now. And most of the research says that buyers, by the time they get to us, by the time they pick up the phone or email us, they're 60 to 70% of the way through a buying journey. They've made a lot of decisions. But the problem they've got is too much information. The problem they've got is, well, I've looked at 20 websites and they're all beautiful and they're all lovely and everybody says they're the best care home or the best car salesperson or whatever. I need you now to take all that information and make sense of it for me. And I need to find out who I can trust. And that's why the word trust, I think, is so important, because that's one of the things it's really hard to get on just by making a website or just by saying nice things about your business.
Yeah, totally. And it's you're moving to more a consultative role as opposed to a sales role. Your job has been partially done for you because of how technology has moved. And you're right. I can go and look online, compare prices of properties, cars, care home ratings without having to talk to a single soul. And then when I do speak to someone, it's because I've done enough research that I'm confident enough in that particular person, product, care home, car, that I want to find out that remaining 30%. So if you automatically know that when someone picks up that phone to you that they've already got 70% of the knowledge you're going to impart upon them, well, then concentrate on the 30%. And analysing the data and analysing your market is the key, really, to doing that. Unfortunately, I've got my colleague Melissa again. She just keeps on holding up signs whenever I'm on a Zoom call saying how much time I've got left, and I'm saying finish at the moment, which means that unfortunately our time has come to an end today. But hopefully you'll join us for another podcast where we can explore some of these topics in a bit more depth in the future. So if people want to find out more about Hampi and how that relates to them, how can they do so, Lee? How can they get in touch with you?
It's very easy to find me on the internet. I'm widely available. If you type Lee Warren speaker into Google, you will find me very easily.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Always great to talk to you. For anyone who wants to find out more about data-driven insights and see some more great material, please go to www.ddinsights.io. I should know our website address by now. And there'll also be some information for about Lee and his book on our website. There'll be some handouts and whatnot. So yeah, please drop by and thank you very much for watching. Much appreciated.